It is close enough to touch. The distance between them has collapsed to a few silent body lengths, the kind of proximity that usually ends without hesitation. The scent is there, fresh, unmistakable, heavy in the air. The ground holds the warmth of recent movement. Everything about this moment points in one direction, and yet nothing happens. The animal remains still. Weight shifted low, muscles tense but unused. Breath moves in short, careful intervals, barely disturbing the dust beneath its chest. A single step forward would be enough. A burst of speed, a decisive motion, and the opportunity would vanish, either claimed or lost forever. But it does neither. Seconds stretch. The world narrows to the space between instinct and restraint. Wind slips past, carrying information that arrives too late to matter. Somewhere nearby, something moves just enough to remind this place that hesitation has consequences. The animal listens. Its ears tilt, then freeze. Not toward the sound, but away from it. The head lowers slightly, eyes fixed on a point that no longer holds the promise it did moments ago. The body knows what should happen next. Everything in its design points toward action. Still it waits. This is not confusion. There is no frantic scanning, no panic, no miscalculation. The posture is controlled, deliberate, as if the choice has already been made and the body is simply allowing the moment to pass. The opportunity shifts. What was once aligned begins to drift. The scent thins. The shape ahead moves out of reach, unclaimed. The animal could still close the distance. The margin has narrowed, but it has not disappeared. It chooses not to. A shallow exhale escapes through clenched jaws. The muscles along its spine relax, not completely, but enough to signal release. The moment dissolves without sound. No chase, no strike, no correction, only absence. The animal turns slightly, just enough to break the line it held so carefully. Its attention moves elsewhere, scanning the perimeter rather than the prize that remains within reach. This shift is subtle, almost invisible, but it changes everything. Because in places like this, restraint is rarely rewarded. The environment does not pause for reflection. It does not offer second chances wrapped in patience. What appears again is never the same. What leaves often does not return. Somewhere beyond the edge of sight, a pressure builds. The faint suggestion of movement becomes more defined. Not close enough to demand response, but close enough to be noted. The animal's breathing adjusts. Its stance tightens once more, not toward opportunity, but toward survival. It has chosen something else. What that choice means is not yet clear. Whether it is caution, memory, or calculation does not matter. The result is the same. The easy path has been abandoned, replaced by uncertainty that stretches forward into unknown terrain. This moment will not be repeated. Whatever follows will be shaped by what did not happen here. The energy not spent. The advantage not taken. The instinct held in check. In the wild, refusing to act is itself an action, and its consequences have already begun. There are ways to recognize an individual without ever naming it. This one carries its history on the body. A shallow scar runs along the flank, pale against darker fur, the kind left not by a clean fight, but by a narrow escape. The gait is uneven when it slows, almost imperceptible when it moves with purpose. It favors one side when turning, not enough to cripple it, but enough to matter in moments where precision decides everything. It has survived long enough to learn restraint. In this landscape, most do not. The territory it moves through is unforgiving, shaped by scarcity and competition. Resources appear briefly, then vanish. The margin between success and failure is thin, and the cost of hesitation is usually immediate. For most animals here, instinct is not questioned. It is followed without delay, because delay is weakness. That is what makes this individual different. Again and again, it chooses not to do what instinct demands. It avoids opportunities that should be taken. It withdraws when advance would seem logical. It passes moments that others would seize without thought. These decisions are not dramatic. They happen quietly, often unnoticed. But over time, they begin to form a pattern, and patterns invite questions. Why would an animal built for survival refuse the simplest advantage? Why turn away from certainty and accept risk instead? What happens when the rules that keep you alive are the very rules you stop following? This is the question that shadows every step it takes. Not whether it will survive today, but whether survival is still being guided by instinct at all. There is no promise that this question has an answer. The wild does not explain itself. It only reveals outcomes. And those outcomes are often indifferent to intention. What matters is not why a choice was made, but what that choice costs over time. For this individual, the cost is already visible. The scar is one reminder. The cautious movement is another. Each deviation from instinct leaves a trace subtle but cumulative. Hunger lingers longer than it should. Territory shrinks in ways that are difficult to reclaim. The margins grow tighter with every decision that favors restraint over action. Yet the behavior continues. This is not ignorance. The animal reads its environment with precision. It senses shifts before they arrive. It knows when it is being watched, when it is being followed, when it is alone. The decision to hold back is not made blindly. It is chosen, which makes it dangerous, because choice implies consequence. From this point forward, everything that happens will be measured against that initial refusal. Every loss will echo the moment when instinct was denied. Every narrow escape will carry the weight of what could have been avoided. The environment will not adjust to accommodate this deviation. It will test it. The question is not whether this animal is wrong. The question is whether survival can exist without obedience to instinct. As the days tighten and the landscape grows less forgiving, the cost of hesitation will increase. Opportunities will become rarer. Threats more persistent. Each decision will remove another path, narrowing the future until only a few remain. Somewhere ahead, this question will demand an answer, not in thought, but in outcome. There was a time when hesitation did not exist. In its earlier seasons, movement was immediate and decisive. The body responded without delay, driven by cues that demanded action rather than consideration. When opportunity appeared, it was taken. When danger approached, it was confronted or escaped with equal certainty. Survival did not require reflection. That certainty did not last. The first fracture came during a period of abundance, when resources were still plentiful and competition seemed manageable. It was not alone then. Others moved through the same territory, sharing space without conflict. Boundaries were understood. Signals were clear. The rules felt stable until they weren't. One encounter changed the balance. Not through violence, but through loss. A routine movement brought it too close to an edge it did not recognize in time. The ground shifted unexpectedly. A pursuit that should have ended quickly dragged on longer than it should have. By the time it withdrew, something was missing. The separation was quiet, final. No sound marked it. No warning announced it. From that moment on, movement carried consequence. The territory felt different afterward. Familiar paths became uncertain. Scents that once promised safety now hinted at absence. The space it occupied grew larger, emptier. Survival continued, but it no longer felt shared. Every success was solitary. Every mistake was unbuffered. This was when caution first appeared, not as fear but as calculation. The second fracture followed seasons later, when the environment hardened and margins tightened. Hunger became persistent rather than temporary. The body thinned. Endurance replaced strength. During one encounter, an old injury reopened, not dramatically, but enough to alter balance. The movement that followed was slower, the recovery incomplete. That scar remained. It did not weaken the animal entirely, but it changed how effort was distributed. Speed could still be summoned, but not repeatedly. Power remained, but only for moments that mattered. Every decision now carried an accounting energy spent versus energy saved. Instinct did not disappear. It became conditional. The third fracture was quieter than the others. It happened during an encounter that never escalated. Another presence crossed into the same space close enough to be acknowledged. The body prepared for confrontation, muscles engaged, timing aligned. Everything indicated that retreat would be costly, but something held back. Not weakness, not confusion, memory. The moment stretched long enough for calculation to replace impulse. The potential outcome replayed itself not as fear, but as probability. The energy required. The injury that could follow. The isolation that would deepen if recovery failed. The body withdrew. Nothing happened. No injury, no loss. But the decision marked a turning point. From then on, instinct no longer acted alone. It waited to be evaluated. This evaluation did not improve survival. It complicated it. Opportunities passed because certainty was never complete. Threats lingered longer because response was delayed. The body remained capable, but the window for using that capability narrowed. What once felt like intelligence now resembled resistance. The environment does not reward resistance. It rewards alignment. Other individuals in the area continued to act decisively. They took what appeared and absorbed the cost when it came. Some failed, others succeeded, but none hesitated long enough to rewrite the rules. This one did. Over time, the cost accumulated. Hunger lingered longer between successes. Territory compressed around safer zones rather than expanding outward. The animal learned where not to go more quickly than where to advance. Its movements became deliberate, economical, and increasingly conservative. Survival continued, but it became fragile. The past did not disappear. It followed closely, shaping decisions before they fully formed. Loss narrowed tolerance. Injury recalibrated risk. Memory interfered with instinct. By the time the present moment arrived, the moment when opportunity stood within reach and went unclaimed, this pattern was already established. The refusal was not sudden. It was the result of accumulation. Each fracture had left a mark. Not one large enough to end survival, but enough to alter its direction. Together they formed a behavior that no longer matched expectation. A strategy that prioritized avoidance over advantage. This strategy has not yet failed completely, but it has not succeeded either. And the environment is changing. What once allowed room for hesitation is closing. Resources are thinning. Competition is tightening. The space to withdraw safely is shrinking with each cycle. The past has shaped the present. What remains uncertain is whether it has prepared this individual for what comes next, or quietly ensured that instinct will eventually demand payment for every moment it was denied. The land it moves through does not forgive delay. This environment operates on narrow margins shaped by exposure rather than shelter. There are no long corridors of safety here, no places where mistakes can be absorbed quietly. Everything is open. Sound travels farther than it should. Scent lingers longer than expected. Movement, once noticed, cannot be taken back. Time behaves differently in a place like this. Moments that feel brief stretch into vulnerability. Pauses become signals. Stillness attracts attention rather than deflecting it. The rules are simple, but they are enforced without exception. Act when the window opens or lose it. Move when the ground allows or be seen. For most, these rules are not learned. They are inherited. The animal understands them instinctively. It reads the wind as it shifts direction, adjusting position before the change is complete. It recognizes the hours when the light flattens the terrain, making depth difficult to judge. It knows which paths amplify sound and which swallow it. None of this is new. What has changed is how it responds. In this place, hesitation carries a cost that compounds quickly. Food sources do not wait. They pass through briefly, then relocate. Water appears where it is least expected and disappears without warning. Shelter is temporary, useful only if reached at the right moment. Miss the timing, and the same place becomes exposure. Predation here is not constant. It is selective. Threats do not announce themselves with aggression. They remain distant, undefined, until the moment they commit. By then, options collapse, escape routes narrow, reaction time disappears, Survival depends on having acted earlier, not reacting later. This is the law of the environment. There are no rehearsals. The animal has learned where danger concentrates. It avoids certain ridgelines at specific hours, not because predators are always present, but because they might be. It favors routes that allow retreat even when they require more energy. It reads absence as carefully as presence sensing, when silence means safety and when it means waiting. But this knowledge creates friction, because knowing the rules does not guarantee compliance. The environment does not reward understanding. It rewards execution. The gap between the two is where failure begins. There is a presence here that reinforces this truth. Not always visible, not always close, but consistent enough to shape behavior. It moves through the same space following patterns that overlap just enough to matter. It leaves traces subtle, delayed, difficult to interpret. By the time they are noticed, the moment to respond has often passed. This presence does not chase, it waits. The animal senses it during the quiet hours when sound thins and the air cools. A faint shift in pressure. A disruption that cannot be placed. Not enough to flee, but enough to remain alert. This is how pressure is applied here, not through confrontation, but through persistence. Mistakes are rarely dramatic. They are cumulative. A delayed movement exposes a silhouette. A cautious pause extends vulnerability. A retreat taken too late narrows options the next time. The environment remembers these errors, even when the animal does not. Energy management becomes critical. There is no surplus to draw from. Every sprint must justify itself. Every standoff must be calculated. The cost of unnecessary action is exhaustion. The cost of restraint is opportunity lost. Both lead to the same outcome if repeated often enough. The environment does not care which one is chosen. It only tallies results. This is where the animal's deviation becomes dangerous, not because it lacks knowledge, but because it applies it selectively. It understands the law, but it does not always obey it. Where others commit early and accept the risk, it waits for certainty that never arrives. Where instinct would demand movement, it calculates until the window closes. In this place, certainty is a luxury. By the time it appears, the advantage is already gone. The environment offers no protection for intelligence divorced from action. It does not value caution for its own sake. It values alignment movement that matches conditions exactly without delay or resistance. Those who survive here do not always make the right choice. They make it quickly. The animal stands at odds with this principle. Its restraint shaped by loss and memory conflicts with the pace demanded by the land. What once protected it now creates friction. Each moment of hesitation pushes it closer to a threshold it cannot see. And thresholds here are unforgiving. Cross one too late, and there is no adjustment, no recovery, no quiet correction. The environment responds once decisively and moves on. The presence that lingers nearby is patient. It does not need to force an outcome. The rules of the land will do that eventually. All it requires is time and repetition. The animal feels this pressure without naming it. The air seems heavier. The space between safe zones stretches wider. Opportunities narrow into brief flashes rather than sustained openings. The law is clear. In this environment, survival belongs not to the strongest or the most cautious, but to the ones whose actions align precisely with the moment they are given. And here, a single hesitation is not a pause. It is a decision. The opportunity appears without warning. It arrives the way most real chances do in this place, brief, unannounced, and indifferent to readiness. The air shifts first, carrying a familiar trace that sharpens attention instantly. Movement follows controlled but close enough that the outcome should already be decided. Everything aligns. The angle is right. The distance is short. The timing imperfect but workable. The environment offers no obstacles that would justify delay. For most, this would be the moment when instinct takes over, completely erasing thought and compressing action into a single decisive burst. The animal knows this. Its body responds as if the decision has already been made. Muscles gather. Balance settles. Weight shifts forward. For a fraction of a second, nothing exists beyond the space between it and what lies ahead. Then something interrupts. Not a sound, not a threat. Just a tightening, an internal resistance that arrives without explanation. The body holds. The forward motion pauses mid-commitment, caught between readiness and restraint. The moment stretches. Breath slows deliberately, not from fear but from control. The animal remains poised, every part of it prepared to act, yet choosing not to. The opportunity does not retreat immediately. It lingers just long enough to make the refusal unmistakable. This is not caution, this is avoidance. The animal angles slightly away, adjusting its stance, so that withdrawal becomes possible without drawing attention. It does not flee. It simply disengages, loosening the tension it built moments earlier. The alignment breaks. The window narrows. The opportunity begins to fade. What should have been a clean outcome dissolves into uncertainty. Distance increases by degrees rather than leaps. The scent thins. The movement ahead becomes less defined, less accessible. The environment absorbs the moment as if it never existed. The animal watches it go. There is no reaction, no visible frustration, no immediate consequence. From the outside, nothing appears wrong. The land remains unchanged. The air returns to its previous state. The absence left behind feels unremarkable, but something has shifted. The refusal creates a subtle imbalance. Energy prepared for action remains unused, trapped in the body without release. This surplus does not disappear. It converts into restlessness, into heightened awareness that has nowhere to resolve itself. The animal moves on, but not cleanly. Its path curves wider than necessary. It favors distance over efficiency, circling rather than committing to a direct route. This adjustment costs time. Time in this environment translates quickly into exposure. The first consequence is small. Hunger lingers longer than it should have. The margin between energy gained and energy spent tightens. The animal compensates by slowing movement, conserving where it can. But conservation has limits. It cannot replace what was not taken. The second consequence follows quietly. Space begins to close. Areas that once felt accessible now require more caution. Movement through them becomes measured rather than fluid. The animal senses this shift, but cannot locate its source. The environment feels the same, yet behaves differently. This is the danger of refusing an obvious opportunity. The cost does not arrive immediately. It arrives indirectly, reshaping future moments rather than punishing the present one. The animal has not failed. It has simply chosen a harder path without realizing it. Two explanations suggest themselves. The first is memory. The refusal may be rooted in accumulated experience losses that taught restraint injuries, that redefined risk outcomes, that punished decisiveness in the past. From this perspective, avoidance is not weakness. It is adaptation, a learned response meant to preserve what remains. The second is misalignment. The animal may be applying old calculations to new conditions, trusting patterns that no longer fit the current environment. What once protected it may now interfere. The hesitation that prevented injury before may now invite it not through action, but through delay. Neither explanation offers certainty. Both carry risk. The environment does not clarify which is correct. It continues without adjustment, indifferent to reasoning. The animal moves through it, carrying the weight of a choice that left no immediate mark, but altered the trajectory ahead. As the hours pass, the absence grows louder. The animal encounters no replacement opportunity of equal clarity. Smaller chances appear and vanish without resolving the imbalance. Each requires more effort, more exposure, more time. The easy moment is gone, replaced by complexity. The animal remains alert, attentive, controlled. But control does not feed hunger. As daylight shifts and the terrain tightens, the significance of the refusal becomes harder to ignore. What was avoided cannot be reclaimed. What was preserved begins to cost more than it saved. The animal adjusts again, narrowing its focus, reducing movement to essentials. But the environment responds by narrowing in return. Space contracts. Options thin. This is how deviation announces itself, not with failure, but with pressure. The animal has crossed a line it did not see. Whether that line represents wisdom or error is not yet clear. The outcome will depend on what follows, not on what was avoided. The environment will not judge the choice itself. It will judge its consequences. And the first anomaly has already begun to reshape everything that comes next. Was this refusal a necessary act of survival? Or the moment when survival quietly became more difficult? The consequences do not arrive all at once. They arrive as adjustments. The animal wakes later than it should not, because it slept deeply, but because the night offered no clean resolution. Hunger has not sharpened into urgency yet, but it lingers an unquiet presence that narrows focus. Movement becomes economical by necessity rather than preference. Each step is weighed not against opportunity, but against endurance. The first cost is time. Without the energy gained from the missed opportunity, the animal extends its search, moving farther than planned through spaces that demand caution. Routes that once served as corridors now feel exposed. The body compensates by slowing, favoring cover where little exists. Time stretches thin, pulling risk along with it. The second cost is position. Territory does not announce when it shifts. It changes through absence. The animal returns to familiar ground and finds its subtly altered scent lines layered over its own pressure points that suggest recent passage by something else. Not close enough to confront, not distant enough to ignore. The space has not been taken, but it is no longer uncontested. The animal adjusts its path to avoid escalation. This avoidance carries its own price. Detours lengthen travel. Energy drains without return. The body tightens around conservation strategies that cannot last. Hunger deepens into calculation, and calculation slows response. The third cost is attention. The animal begins to notice patterns it previously dismissed as background noise. A repeated disturbance at the edge of awareness. A shift in silence that holds longer than it should. These signals do not confirm a threat, but they refuse to resolve into safety. Being watched is not the fear. Being tracked is. The animal does not see pursuit. It senses alignment movements that coincide too often. Absences that close in rather than widen. This presence does not rush. It does not force a confrontation. It allows the environment to apply pressure instead, narrowing options with patience. The animal responds by reducing exposure. Movement contracts to windows that feel safer, even when those windows are inefficient. It favors familiarity over advantage, returning to spaces that promise predictability rather than reward. This choice stabilizes the immediate risk, but compounds the long-term cost. Hunger sharpens. The body begins to ration output. Bursts of speed are avoided unless necessary. Recovery takes longer. The old injury tightens not enough to incapacitate, but enough to demand caution. The animal carries this limitation, silently adjusting posture and angle to mask it. Nothing breaks, nothing collapses, but nothing improves. The environment mirrors this stagnation. Opportunities appear smaller, less decisive, more expensive to pursue. Each demands a higher price for a lower return. The animal tests one and withdraws before commitment, recognizing the imbalance too late to reverse it. The space responds by closing further. This is how consequence accumulates through repetition, without resolution. Each choice to conserve creates the need to conserve more. Each avoidance narrows the future into fewer, riskier paths. The animal begins to circle rather than advance, conserving energy while spending time it cannot afford. The presence nearby grows more defined, not closer but clearer. The animal recognizes the pattern now. This is not coincidence. The alignment of movements, the timing of disturbances, the way silence gathers before dispersing. These are not random. Something else is adapting to the animal's restraint, using it as a guide. The realization arrives quietly. By refusing one opportunity, the animal has invited another kind of pressure. The body reacts by tightening its routines. It shortens forays. It chooses concealment over expansion. The goal shifts from gaining advantage to preventing loss. Survival becomes defensive rather than opportunistic. This is dangerous, because defense alone does not sustain life here. As the cycle continues, the animal begins to pay in small but undeniable ways. Weight drops. Recovery slows. The margin for error thins to nothing. Each decision must now account for fatigue as well as risk. The environment offers no sympathy for this balancing act. One evening, the animal misjudges distance. Not by much, just enough. The ground shifts unexpectedly, and the correction comes late. The body absorbs the adjustment, but pain flares along the old injury, sharp, immediate, demanding attention. The animal steadies itself and withdraws, but the message is clear. There is no surplus left. The consequences have reached the body. From this point on, choices are no longer theoretical. Every movement carries consequence that cannot be delayed or deferred. The animal must now choose not just between action and restraint, but between collapse and continuation. The presence nearby does not move closer. It doesn't need to. The environment has done its work. The animal settles into a shallow rest, conserving what remains, listening to the land shift around it. The pressure does not lift. It holds steady, patient, waiting for the next mistake or the next necessity, whichever arrives first. Because now there is no neutral ground. Every option costs something, and the next decision will demand payment immediately. The change announces itself without sound. It begins as a detail that should not be there. A trace, faint but distinct, carried on a current that does not belong to this hour. The animal stops mid-step, body tightening instantly. Not in alarm, but in recognition. This scent is not new. It has been encountered before, but never here, never this close, and never without warning. The animal lowers its head slightly, drawing in more information. The signal sharpens. This is not random overlap. This is not the residue of something that passed through hours ago. The trace is recent, deliberate, and aligned too closely with the animal's own movement to be coincidence. For the first time since the anomaly, the pressure gains a shape. The animal shifts position slowly, testing angles without committing. Its attention moves outward, scanning not for immediate threat, but for confirmation. The environment responds with silence that feels arranged rather than empty. No sudden movement, no corrective disturbance, just space held too carefully. This is when understanding fractures. The presence that has been applying pressure is not reacting to mistakes. It is responding to restraint. The realization lands without drama. Each avoided opportunity, each delayed movement, each conservative detour has been read not as caution, but as pattern. The animal's behavior has not gone unnoticed. It has been mapped, anticipated. The shock is not fear. It is clarity. The animal recognizes the logic immediately. A restrained individual leaves predictable gaps. It returns to safer zones. It limits exposure. It favors consistency over advantage. In an environment where most act quickly and disappear, restraint stands out. The animal has made itself legible. The scent confirms this. It appears again farther along the animal's likely route, faint but placed with precision. Not close enough to force confrontation, not distant enough to dismiss. The alignment is intentional. This is not pursuit. This is positioning. The animal adjusts course sharply, abandoning familiarity for uncertainty. It moves into less favorable terrain where footing is unstable and cover is thin. This choice carries risk, but it breaks expectation. The body absorbs the discomfort, prioritizing unpredictability over efficiency. The scent fades, not because the presence has retreated, but because the alignment has been disrupted. For a brief moment, the pressure lifts. The animal pauses, reassessing everything that led here. The anomaly was not simply a refusal. It was a signal. The consequences were not random misfortune. They were feedback. The environment has been responding not to weakness, but to deviation. The animal has been playing a different game without realizing it. This reframes the past. The old injury did not make restraint necessary. Memory did not demand avoidance. Those choices were not protections. They were adaptations that worked under different conditions. In this environment, they have become liabilities. The shock lies in this inversion. What felt intelligent may have been exploitable. The animal moves again slower now, but not cautious in the same way. The hesitation has changed quality. It is no longer defensive. It is strategic. The body tests shorter bursts of movement, abrupt stops, irregular patterns that resist prediction. The environment reacts differently. The silence becomes less precise. The pressure loses coherence. Signals scatter rather than align. Whatever was mapping the animal's behavior now struggles to recalibrate. This confirms the realization. The threat was never direct. It was opportunistic. The animal has not been hunted for weakness, but for consistency. The moment restraint turned into routine, it became readable. And readability here is vulnerability. The animal holds this understanding briefly long enough to feel its weight. Then it moves, not toward safety, not toward advantage, toward uncertainty that breaks the pattern it has been trapped inside. This movement costs energy it cannot spare, but it reclaims something more valuable: control. The environment does not punish this immediately. It watches, it waits. The pressure does not vanish, but it loosens, no longer able to anticipate the animal's next move. This is the pivot, not a victory, a correction. The animal has learned that survival here does not belong to the most cautious or the most aggressive, but to the least predictable. Restraint, when repeated, becomes signal. Avoidance, when consistent, becomes invitation. The animal pauses once more, scanning the terrain it has entered. It is unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and offers no guarantees. But it is not aligned with expectation. For now, that is enough. If restraint creates safety only until it becomes pattern, then when does caution stop protecting and start exposing you? Night does not arrive all at once. It settles, gradually pressing down on the land in layers. Light thins, first stretching shadows until distance becomes unreliable. Sound follows, losing clarity as the air cools and carries it farther than expected. What remains is not darkness, but uncertainty, space stripped of reference points. The animal moves into this uncertainty without pause. It does not seek shelter immediately. It cannot afford to. The unfamiliar terrain offers no known refuge, no tested routes. Every decision now carries equal risk, and hesitation no longer provides cover. The body tightens around this reality, conserving energy while refusing stillness. Hunger sharpens into focus. It is no longer a background pressure, but a directive. The body begins to ration movement, automatically favoring efficiency over comfort. Muscles respond more slowly, not from weakness, but from deliberate restraint. The animal knows there will be no recovery if it spends too much too soon. The night stretches. Time loses shape. Without clear markers, moments bleed into one another. The animal moves in short intervals, stopping often not to rest, but to listen. The environment speaks in fragments now. A shift in air pressure, a faint disturbance carried along the ground, a silence that lingers too long to be accidental. Each signal demands interpretation. None offers certainty. The animal chooses paths that resist expectation. It avoids clean lines and predictable corridors, favoring uneven ground that breaks rhythm. This choice costs energy. The footing is unstable. Each step requires correction, but it also fractures alignment, denying any observer the ability to anticipate movement. The pressure does not vanish. It diffuses. Instead of concentrating behind or ahead, it spreads across the night, impossible to locate precisely. The animal senses this diffusion as absence rather than relief. Not being able to locate a threat does not remove it. It only removes direction. This is worse. The animal adjusts again, shortening its range. It commits to a narrow band of movement, looping through unfamiliar space just enough to test boundaries without announcing intention. Hunger pushes back against this strategy, demanding resolution rather than management. Resolution does not arrive. Opportunities appear briefly, then dissolve before commitment can form. Movement detected at the edge of perception never resolves into form. Scent traces led nowhere definitive. Each chance carries too much uncertainty to justify the cost of pursuit. The animal lets them pass, not from restraint but from calculation. The body feels heavier now. The old injury tightens as the temperature drops, sending small corrections through posture and balance. These adjustments are subtle but constant draining focus that should be reserved for the environment. Fatigue creeps in, not as collapse, but as narrowing. The animal's awareness contracts around essentials. Peripheral signals lose priority. The night becomes a sequence of immediate concerns rather than a navigable whole. This narrowing is dangerous, but unavoidable. The animal counters it with motion. Short bursts, abrupt changes in direction, stops that end just before stillness becomes signal. The pattern remains irregular enough to resist mapping, but the cost accumulates. Each correction pulls from a reserve that is already thin. The pressure responds, not by closing in, but by waiting. The animal recognizes this tactic now. It does not rush to break the stalemate. It allows the night to do the work instead. Fatigue will erode unpredictability. Hunger will force commitment. The environment favors patience over force. The animal understands this. It continues anyway. The night deepens. Temperature drops further. The ground hardens in places, softens in others. Each change alters sound and scent, reshaping the information available. The animal adapts constantly, adjusting angle, speed, and posture to compensate. This adaptation is exhausting. Hours pass without resolution. The animal tests one final option, a narrow passage that offers partial cover but limits escape. It moves through, cautiously aware that committing here could end everything quickly. Halfway through, it stops. The silence ahead feels different, not empty, held. The animal does not retreat immediately. It weighs the cost of reversal against the risk of continuation. Both are high. Hunger presses hard now, demanding action. The body trembles slightly, not from fear, but from depletion. The animal advances one step. Nothing happens. Another. Still nothing. The tension builds not toward explosion, but toward endurance. How long can this continue? How much can be spent without return? The animal recognizes the trap not as a place, but as a duration. The longer this night stretches, the fewer options will remain by morning. The animal breaks the stalemate abruptly. It pivots away from the passage and accelerates into open ground, accepting exposure in exchange for disruption. The movement is sudden, costly, and necessary. The body absorbs the strain, pushing through discomfort that flares along the old injury. The pressure shifts, not closer, scattered. The animal does not slow immediately. It continues until the burst is spent, then stops hard, forcing stillness before fatigue can announce itself. Breath steadies slowly. The world listens back. The night holds. No pursuit follows. No immediate consequence arrives. The animal has bought time, but at a price it cannot yet measure. Energy spent now will be unavailable later. The margin shrinks further. The animal lowers itself into shallow rest, not sleep. It remains alert, conserving what remains, letting the night pass around it rather than through it. Hunger pulses steadily. Fatigue weighs heavy. But the pressure remains unfocused, unable to resolve into threat. The long night has done its work. By morning, something will have to give. Either the environment will offer resolution, or the animal will be forced to create it. There will be no more room for delay. Morning does not bring relief. It brings clarity. Light returns, slowly flattening the land and exposing distances that felt negotiable in darkness. What the night softened, the morning sharpens. Edges become defined. Paths reveal themselves without ambiguity. There is nowhere to hide from what must be decided. The animal rises with effort. Fatigue clings to the body, heavy and insistent. The old injury protests immediately, sending a brief spike of pain that demands adjustment. Hunger presses harder now. No longer patient, no longer willing to be managed. The body has reached a threshold where conservation is no longer viable. Something must happen. The animal senses movement ahead, not close but aligned. A convergence of cues that points toward a single corridor of possibility. This is not opportunity in the familiar sense. It is necessity shaped like choice. Two paths present themselves. One offers cover and delay. It bends away from exposure, promising time at the cost of distance. The other cuts straight through open ground, demanding speed and commitment the body may not be able to sustain. Neither is safe. The animal stands between them, weight shifting subtly as calculations unfold. Energy reserves are thin. The night has stripped away margin. Any error now will be final, not because the environment is hostile, but because it is exact. The presence nearby does not announce itself. It doesn't need to. The animal feels it as pressure rather than threat. The alignment has tightened again, no longer scattered by unpredictability. Whatever waits has adjusted patient enough to let exhaustion finish the work. The animal cannot wait. It chooses the open path, not because it is better, but because delay will turn the other into certainty of failure. The body commits before doubt can interfere. Muscles gather what remains. Balance locks into place. Breath shortens, preparing for the cost. The first strides are clean. The body remembers speed. It recalls the efficiency that restraint once suppressed. For a moment, movement feels right, aligned, purposeful, decisive. The land passes quickly beneath distances collapsing as they should. Then the cost arrives. The old injury flares sharp and immediate. The correction it demands fractures rhythm. Each stride now requires adjustment. Speed bleeds into effort. Effort drains what little remains. The animal pushes on. Stopping would be worse. The open ground offers no cover, no retreat. The choice has removed alternatives. This is the final exchange energy for distance, pain, for progress. The animal narrows focus to the next step, then the next, refusing to widen awareness beyond what can be managed. A shift in the environment registers too late. Not a sound, not a movement, just a tightening of space that signals proximity. The animal adjusts course instinctively, angling just enough to avoid alignment without slowing completely. This maneuver costs more than it should, but it buys something vital: time. The animal reaches the far edge of open ground and breaks into uneven cover, collapsing momentum into controlled withdrawal. The body shudders as it slows lungs, burning muscles trembling under accumulated strain. The presence does not follow immediately. It doesn't have to. The animal presses deeper into cover, using obstruction to compensate for lost speed. Movement becomes jagged, reactive. The body absorbs impact it can no longer soften. Each correction risks collapse, but stopping would invite it. Then abruptly, the pressure releases. Not completely, just enough. The animal senses the shift and freezes, forcing stillness despite exhaustion. Breath steadies slowly. Pain remains, but it is contained. The environment settles into a fragile balance, holding its shape without escalating. The climax is passed, not as victory, as outcome. The animal has not secured advantage. It has survived an exchange it could not afford to repeat. The cost is evident now. Weight lost, strength diminished, movement compromised. The body carries this damage openly, without buffer. Whatever waits nearby has recalculated. The opportunity to force resolution has passed. But the conditions remain altered. The animal has not escaped. It is repositioned at a price that will shape everything that follows. This is the truth of the choice made. The animal remains alive, but the future has narrowed. The path ahead is not empty. It is constrained by what has been spent and what cannot be recovered. Every movement from this point forward will carry the memory of this moment. The environment does not acknowledge effort. It records outcome. The animal lowers itself into brief rest, not from safety, but from necessity. The body demands it. The land offers no assurance that it will be allowed, but there is no alternative. In this place, survival is not about choosing well. It is about choosing what you are willing to lose. And today, the animal has paid. The land does not react to survival. It absorbs it. After the exchange, nothing announces that anything has changed. Light continues its slow movement across the ground. Air settles into familiar patterns. From a distance, the place looks unchanged, as if the morning has erased the night entirely. But the animal carries the difference. It rises cautiously, testing weight before committing. The body responds unevenly, compensating where it must. The old injury no longer hides beneath motion, it defines it. Each step now includes a correction that did not exist before. Movement remains possible, but it is no longer free. The animal moves anyway, not far, not fast, just enough to maintain distance from the space it has already paid for. Hunger remains, but it no longer presses with urgency. It has shifted into something colder, an awareness that survival now depends on preservation rather than gain. The environment reflects this change without comment. Routes that once promised possibility now feel expensive. Areas avoided before become unavoidable. The animal's range contracts not because it chooses to, but because the cost of expansion has become too high. What remains is a narrower version of the world defined by endurance rather than opportunity. This is the aftermath, not collapse. Adjustment. The central question returns quietly, without ceremony. Why did this animal refuse the instinctive path when it was offered? The answer does not arrive as explanation. It arrives as condition. The animal's restraint did not kill it, nor did it protect it completely. It altered the shape of survival, trading certainty for longevity, advantage for continuation. There are ways to interpret this. One possibility is wisdom. The refusal may have prevented an outcome worse than what followed. The injury, the loss of margin, the narrowed future, these may still be preferable to the alternative that instinct would have demanded. Survival in this reading is not about dominance, but about avoiding irreversible failure. Another possibility is error. The hesitation may have converted manageable risk into prolonged vulnerability. What was once a single decisive moment became an extended struggle, draining resources over time. In this view, the refusal did not preserve life, it complicated it. There is a third possibility. That instinct itself is not a rule, but a tendency shaped by averages. That deviation does not guarantee failure or success, only difference. And that survival at its edge is not a measure of correctness, but of persistence. The animal does not consider these interpretations. It cannot. It moves forward with what remains, adjusting to a body and world that no longer offer clean solutions. The presence nearby has faded into background pressure, still there, but no longer aligned tightly enough to force immediate consequence. This is not safety. It is space. Space earned at a cost that cannot be repaid. The animal settles into a rhythm that favors caution without rigidity. It avoids repetition. It resists becoming readable again. Unpredictability is now necessity rather than strategy. Each movement is chosen not for advantage, but for survivability under constraint. Life continues, not triumphantly, accurately. The land will test this adjustment in time. Scarcity will return. Pressure will realign. Another moment will come that demands decision without guarantee. When it does, the animal will face it with a body shaped by this outcome and a history that cannot be undone. The question will return then, sharper than before. Was the refusal an act of intelligence or the first step toward limitation? There is no final answer, only evidence that accumulates over time, written into posture, movement, and range. Survival leaves no commentary, only traces that fade as quickly as they appear. The animal moves out of view, not escaping the story, but carrying it forward into conditions that will continue to judge without explanation. And somewhere beyond the edge of sight, the environment waits, indifferent, exact, and ready to test the next decision. When survival demands a choice between instinct and restraint, is staying alive enough? Or does the cost of hesitation shape who survives next?